In maximum security, respect isn't just currency, it's oxygen. Looking at the wrong man for a second too long can cost you a shiv between the ribs. I was fully prepared to bleed out on a visiting room floor in 2007, all because my mother wouldn't stop staring at the most lethal predator in the prison. I thought I was about to get beaten to death right there on the floor just to protect her. I didn't know the monster I was staring at was about to become my only way out. But to understand why I was sweating bullets, you need to understand the numbers. In upstate New York, your number is your rank. The first two digits of the year you walked in. I was in '07, fresh fish. I was 20-something and desperate to prove I wasn't prey. Every day was a high-wire act just to keep the wolves at bay. But the man sitting across the visiting room, the one my oblivious mother's eyes were currently glued to, he was wearing an '88. Let that sink in. 1988. This man had survived the darkest, most savage, blood-soaked era of the American correctional system. While I was in elementary school, he was surviving riots, block wars, and lockdowns. He was a mountain of a man, eerily silent, radiating the kind of dark stillness that only comes from inflicting and surviving extreme violence. The undeniable proof was carved right into his flesh, a thick, jagged scar slashing diagonally right across his face. You didn't speak to him, you didn't breathe in his direction, and you certainly didn't mad dog him from across a crowded room. It was my very first visitation day. The visiting room was loud, crowded, and smelled like cheap vending machine food. But I tuned all of it out because my mother wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was locked tightly over my left shoulder, drilling an insulting hole directly into the side of the '88's scarred face. In my world, staring is a direct, undeniable challenge. It's a blatant declaration of war. I leaned in close, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs, and hissed, "Mom, stop! Stop looking at him right now!"
I had no earthly idea what that giant had done to earn that horrific facial scar, but I knew the prison math. If he walked over to our table to check her blatant disrespect, I would have absolutely no choice but to stand up and throw hands. Fighting a made original gangster in the visiting room meant getting beaten to a bloody pulp, thrown into the sensory deprivation of the hold, and relentlessly hunted by his crew the second I hit the yard. But my mother, completely oblivious to the apex predator she was actively taunting, just swatted her hand at me. "Quiet," she snapped, brushing me off like I was a toddler. "Don't tell me who I know." Before I could beg her to lower her voice, the unthinkable happened. The giant stood up. The scraping of his metal chair against the floor echoed like a gunshot. All the surrounding noise in the room seemed to drop dead in an instant. The '88 squared his massive shoulders and started a slow, deliberate, heavy march straight toward our table. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the edge of the plastic table, bracing for the impact. He stopped inches away, his terrifying, scarred face leaning down, casting a dark shadow over my mother. I held my breath, waiting for the violence to erupt. But instead of throwing a punch, my mother looked up into the cold eyes of a killer and simply smiled. "Rico." For 3 agonizing seconds, time completely stopped. You don't use a man's government name in this environment unless you want to invite immediate violence. The giant's massive frame stiffened, the jagged scar stretching taut as his jaw clenched. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space, his broad shoulders completely swallowing the fluorescent light above our small plastic table. "Who the hell told you to call me that?" His voice was a low, guttural rumble, the kind of terrifying bass that rattles right through your chest. He leaned in, trying to crush her with his size, but he had no idea he was trying to bully a Bronx mother. I gripped the edge of my seat, my muscles coiled like springs, ready to absorb the first devastating blow. But my mother, she didn't flinch. She didn't cower, she didn't break eye contact, and she certainly didn't apologize. She remained eerily, unnervingly calm, while I braced for a brutal beatdown. She just crossed her arms. She looked up at this towering apex predator with the mild annoyance of a woman staring at a misbehaving child. Then, she set the trap. She didn't raise her voice. She just delivered the information with surgical, devastating precision. You used to steal the green apples from Mr. Sal's bodega on 163rd Street, she said, a tone flat and completely unimpressed. And your sister, Maria, broke her collarbone jumping off the fire escape behind my apartment in the summer of '84. I'm the one who carried her bleeding to the free clinic. It was a hyper-specific, inescapable snare of nostalgia. She wasn't just a random civilian visiting an inmate anymore. She had just weaponized a ghost from a past he hadn't touched in over 2 decades. The transformation was instantaneous, and it was the most jarring thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. The monster vanished. His shoulders dropped, and for a split second, you didn't see a hardened killer. You saw a stunned kid from the 1980s. He took a half step back, the breath physically catching in his throat. "Evelyn?" he whispered. The name barely made it out of his mouth, thick with a heavy disbelief that cut right through the chaotic, echoing noise of the visiting room. My brain short-circuited. How did my mom have the upper hand over a gangster who'd been locked in a cage since 1988? They started talking. Actually talking. Exchanging names of old neighbors, reminiscing about a gritty New York that didn't even exist anymore. It was completely surreal. I was sitting in the middle of a maximum security penitentiary, watching a feared enforcer chat with my mom like they were catching up at a Sunday neighborhood barbecue.
Then the reunion paused. The giant slowly turned his massive head and locked his cold eyes onto me. But the look wasn't a threat anymore. It was an intense, calculating evaluation. He took in my green '07 uniform, my tense posture, my defensive glare. He wasn't looking at fresh fish anymore. He was looking at the blood of Evelyn from 163rd Street. Without needing to announce it to the room, without a single grand gesture, an unspoken oath was permanently etched on the concrete walls of that facility. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod. My mother's trap wasn't meant to destroy him. It was set up to destroy anyone else in that prison who ever thought about crossing me. In that single silent exchange, the absolute worst day of my life just became my ultimate bulletproof insurance policy. It didn't take more than 48 hours for the true weight of that visitation room truce to be tested on the yard. Back on the tier, the real predators were always hunting for weakness. A mid-level shot caller named Silas, a guy who thrived on extorting fresh fish, cornered me by the weight pile. He shoved me hard against the cold chain-link fence, his crew flanking him, entirely unaware of the invisible armor I was now wearing. Silas demanded my weekly commissary, his spit hitting my face as he promised a brutal, bloody trip to the infirmary if I didn't comply. He expected me to cower. He expected the typical frantic panic of an '07 rookie. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my fists, and I certainly didn't break eye contact. Channeling the exact same eerie, unshakable calm my mother had weaponized days earlier, I just stared right through him. I knew something he didn't. The trap was already set. The bait had just been swallowed. Silas sneered, pulling a sharpened piece of metal from his waistband, ready to make a violent example out of my silence. But before he could even raise his arm to strike, a massive, suffocating shadow completely eclipsed the harsh afternoon sun. The entire yard went dead silent. Rico didn't yell. He didn't rush. The '88 giant simply materialized from the crowd, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel, and clamped his massive, scarred hand down hard onto Silas's shoulder. The grip was a mechanical vice. I watched, in cinematic slow motion, as the absolute realization of doom hit the extortionist. Silas froze, the blood drained from his face as he turned and saw that infamous scar right over his shoulder.
In a voice loud enough for the whole yard to hear, Rico announced that I was untouchable. Rico didn't throw a single punch. He just forced Silas to drop his blade and apologize to the fresh fish in front of the entire yard. Silas was a ghost after that. For the next 3 years, I walked those violent concrete halls completely untouched. My mother's street history had become my ultimate bulletproof shield, proving that the most ruthless underworld politics are absolutely nothing compared to the deep, intertwined roots of the old neighborhood. I walked into that visitation room ready to fight a monster, only to watch that same monster become my fiercest protector. You can spend your whole life trying to survive hell with your fists, but sometimes your best weapon is the old neighborhood.